Good morning. I'm Eddie Lanham. I'm with the Wild West History Association, and we're here today in Coleman, which is in Coleman County, Texas, to demonstrate how one would repaint one of these markers when they get in the shape that they really need it. Believe me, we've seen most of them that we have repainted so far, which has been from Alice, Texas, all the way up to Brady. Most of them, they don't even have any red left in them, and the white is completely gone, so they're just basically concrete gray is all they are. So we're just going to demonstrate this, and that way if somebody wants to get a Boy Scout troop or somebody like that to repaint some of these, or a church group, whatever, it's not such a big deal to do it. And I got with me Jeff Bearden.
Howdy, I'm Jeff Bearden from Vernon, Texas.
Well, let me go ahead and be working on this while you're telling this history. How about that?
That'll be great.
Okay, I'm going to show you first what we use as far as tools, because you really don't need that many tools. But one thing you're going to need is a sanding block. This is one that I got at one of the home fix-it stores, and I found the roughest coarse sandpaper I could find to use, because you really got to get these flakes off as much as you can. And another one of the tools that we use is this wire brush. This small one looks more like a toothbrush, but you got to get inside these red letters and get all the fungus among us and everything else that's growing in here. Like I say, most of these we do, the red is gone. The reason we picked this one, well, there's only one reason we picked this one. We knew it didn't really need it that bad, but it's 103 degrees out here. So, I mean, so we wanted something in the shade, and I called Kim. And Kim, what's your last name? Little. You're not that little. Anyway, Kim Little, and she said, well, it does, the white needs painting, but the red's not too bad. So anyway, that's why we're here, is because of the shade. Let me tell you the rest of the tools I use besides these two. This is important. All right, the paint we use is an exterior paint, latex, and it's just white, just regular white paint. That's for the marker itself. Now on the letters, we just use just a typical red. It could be just basic red is what I call it. And we pour it in these small little sample jars because it's easier for us to work with when we're painting. Of course, you got to have something to hold your white paint, and you got to have a roller to paint this with. And you be careful now. You got to use a 3-inch roller, not a 4. A 3 will fit in here when we go to do this part. A 4 won't. So anyway, that's why you got to use a 3. And we got small brushes, and where are the small brushes? Oh, here they are. We got small brushes to paint inside of here with. So that's basically, need water to clean up with, paper towels, and I think that's all you need. So I'm gonna get ready to start painting these, sand it first, and Jeff's gonna tell you a little bit about the trail, how it was established, and what they have done.
Thanks, Eddie. Like I said, I'm Jeff Bearden. I'm past president of the Great Western Cattle Trail Association Texas chapter, and had the honor in 2004 to be co-chair of the Vernon, Texas Rotary Club's project to march the Great Western Trail. The Great Western Cattle Trail was the longest and most active of the cattle trails that came into use after the Civil War in Texas. After the war, Texas was in economic ruin. They had no way of making any money. The economy was a shambles, but they had a lot of wild longhorn cattle. The solution was to get them to the market in Dodge City, Abilene, Wichita, Ogallala, and the other cow towns in the Great Plains where they had the railroad. The best known of the trails is the Chisholm Trail that cuts up through Texas and up toward Abilene, known as the Abilene Trail, the Chisholm Trail, and a bunch of others. There were other trails that preceded those, but Chisholm was the best known as it started in about 1867 after the war. When tick fever in Texas cattle became a problem for the Kansas farmers, and when population growth in eastern Texas made it harder for the Chisholm Trail to be used, the solution was to find another trail farther to the west, about the time that the railroad had reached out toward Dodge City, Kansas. So the Great Western Trail came into use in 1874 when John Lytle and others drove cattle to Dodge City and points north. And for 19 years, the trail was in use and helped Texas get out of the economic depression after the Civil War. Some 6 to 7 million head of cattle were driven up this trail during that time. Not all of the cattle stopped at Dodge City or Ogallala. Some 60% of the cattle were sent on north to the northern Great Plains states to help establish the cattle industry in the northern Great Plains. So the Great Western Trail, it originated near Matamoros and in South Texas where the cattle were gathered, went north all the way to Canada as cattle were taken up there to establish the ranches, to take to Fort Robinson and other places to help feed the Indians that were on reservations and help get the West settled. In the early 2000s, the Western Trail Historical Society of Oklahoma began the process of marking the Western Trail through Oklahoma using markers like these. They had gotten the idea from the late Bob Clemmy, who used similar markers to mark the Chisholm Trail. So the Western Trail Historical Society came to Vernon, Texas, and did a program for our Rotary Club about their project and encouraged us to consider picking it up for Texas. We apparently didn't get the message because they came back for a second program and told us that if we would undertake the project of marking the trail in Texas, then they would give us the first marker to be placed at Doan's Crossing on the Red River, which was the great cattle crossing in the site of Doan's store, made famous recently in the TV series 1883. So they gave us a marker, and in May of 2004, we planted that marker near the old Doan's adobe house, which is one of the last remaining structures that saw the cattle drives go past it. The adobe house is the site of the oldest continuous celebration in Texas, Doan's May Picnic. It's held there every year in May. In May of 2004, the Western Trail Historical Society presented the marker. It was brought in by a wagon led by Oklahoma State Senator Robert Kerr. It was received in Texas by a Texas State Representative riding up from the north on a horse, Representative Rick Hardcastle. We planted the post there and started a tradition that's carried on through most of the marker dedications since. The two groups joined together and put the marker in the ground and then dedicated it by pouring a mason jar of Red River water over it, much like christening a ship. And we've continued that tradition by taking a jar of Red River water to other places where we've dedicated markers. Once we undertook the project, the Vernon Rotary Club raised the money and made the contacts to place markers in every county in Texas where the Great Western Trail passed. We put 6 markers every 6 miles apart in Wilbarger County and encouraged every county to do a similar convention because that's what Oklahoma had done. They placed them on the township markers every 6 miles. Over the course of the project, the Vernon Rotary Club, with marker makers Phil McQuistion, who's here with me today, and Rick Jewett, made some 115 markers to distribute up and down the trail. This map shows some of the locations of the markers in Texas up through about 2007. More markers have been added since then. Each marker weighs about 225 pounds, and the ones made in Vernon have a rotary emblem in the back of them to demonstrate that it was from the Vernon Rotary Club. In 2006, the Vernon Rotary Club, in partnership with the Western Trail Historical Society, took 7 markers and molds to Ogallala, Nebraska, whose Rotary Club hosted a function there where we dedicated a marker at Boot Hill Cemetery in Ogallala and presented markers and molds to representatives from the other states of the Great Plains that the trail passed through so that they could continue the project. To this point, markers have been, at least one marker that is, have been placed in every state except Wyoming, and we understand that they're working on it. The Rotary Club attended lots of these marker dedications and made hundreds of friends up and down the cattle trail, just like the friends we've made here in Coleman County and our new friends with the Wild West History Association. We have been through dedication ceremonies from Matamoros in Mexico, where the trail originated, to Saskatchewan, where we met with families who could trace their modern-day cattle herds to cattle that came up the Great Western Cattle Trail. We had partnered with Oklahoma to start the project in Kansas. We were fortunate at the start of this project that the folks in Bandera, Texas, were going to put together a Bandera to Dodge City trail drive. So we placed the second marker in Texas at Bandera, Labor Day of 2004, as that trail drive kicked off, and were able to dedicate a lot of the markers in conjunction with that trail drive's arrival in different towns. At the conclusion of the trail drive in Dodge City in October of 2004, we delivered a marker to downtown Dodge City in a chuck wagon that was placed on Wyatt Earp Boulevard, and that got Kansas involved in the project. We continue to make friends, develop our history of the cattle trails, and it's important to preserve our heritage. It's important for small towns like Vernon and Coleman and Menard and Brady and the others to capitalize on their heritage, to help invite people to town to understand heritage tourism. And it's also important that we help celebrate the history of the cattle industry so that the young people of today know that their meat doesn't just come from McDonald's or from the supermarket. There's an entire cattle industry behind it that has a proud history and a strong future in and of itself. So we're appreciative to the Wild West History Association and Eddie for the work they've done to help preserve these markers. And we agree that it's a good project for anyone to take on. We had a Boy Scout troop take it on as an Eagle project to mark or to restore the markers from the Red River south through a couple of counties. And we invite county historical commissions, scout groups, or other civic groups to look at the markers in their county and do just what Eddie's doing to repair and repaint them and keep them fresh so that people can find them when they're looking to follow the trail. The Great Western Trail Association has a project going to log the GPS codes of the location of every one of the markers and try to publicize that on its website. That's been a slow project, but it's underway.
Well, I'm coming right along. It just takes me a little bit longer to paint than it does for you to talk. So you might have to think up something else to say while I continue to paint.
All right.
We won't go all the way through painting the whole thing. I'm just about through with, I got 3 sides done, and I will show how we do this last part here in a minute. Let me get this side over here where you are, and then we'll do some red and show how that's done and how we come back and put the white actually over the red, which is, that's why you got to have this 3-inch marker. So you got anything else you can tell about the what's next?
Well, we're hoping for some resolution on a proposal to add the Chisholm Trail and the Great Western Trail to the National Historic Trail System of the National Park Service. Some years ago, a scoping study was done to include those, and it was a different kind of a process for them because they'd never really done a north-south trail like that, to our understanding, and it was harder to identify where the trail went in some places because the ground had been cultivated, and there wasn't a distinct trail like you might find on the Oregon Trail, where you can still find some of the ruts. There are places along the cattle trails where you can see evidence of them going along.
Is there really?
Yes, but it's hard to find. It's hard to find in our part of the country because a lot of that ground is cultivated.
You know, but what I've learned, you know, you can go out like on the Oregon Trail, and you can find these ruts.
I've seen those.
But the cattle spread out so far, they were so far apart, they didn't really create a rut until they went to cross at a river crossing. That's when they neck them down. Is that correct?
That's correct, because they would the river crossings were the most dangerous part of the cattle drive, so they would want to try to find a place to cross the river that was relatively safe, that they could know that they wouldn't have to fight quicksand or real deep spots, that sort of thing. But you're right, it is kind of hard to find where they were, or where the trail went, and it's correct that it was hard to have a distinct trail. We found it was hard to say the trail went right here because with multiple herds going north in a single season, they would have to spread out to find grass to graze the herds on the way up. So the trail might be 5 or 6 miles wide during the active trailing season as the cattle were moved over and following another path in order to have fresh grass that wasn't consumed by the trail that went ahead of them. It's interesting, there's part of the issue with the national park thing has been that some controversy about the naming. And there's been controversy about the naming of the Western Trail going back to the 1930s when a gentleman tried to call it the Longhorn Chisholm Highway. The Western Trail, as I said, is less well known, but during its time it went by several names. In addition to Great Western Trail, it was also known as the Fort Griffin Dodge City Trail, the Western Trail, and others, just like the Chisholm Trail was known as Abilene Trail and others. And you've got a steadier hand than I do, Eddie.
Well, I'll make a mess here in a minute, and that's what the white, this has to actually dry for about 5 minutes before you can put the white over the top of it. But anyway, this is basically what you do. You just take a small artist type brush, and you go in here inside these letters and put the red in, or back in. And then after, I'll do a couple of these. I don't want you to sit here, and it's going to take me about 30 minutes to do all of them, but I'll show you how we do the white on top of this. And it works real good with that 3-inch roller.
You know, next year marks the 150th anniversary of the first drive up the Great Western Cattle Trail.
Does it really?
1974. And we hope that the state of Texas and the communities along the way will partner up to acknowledge that, because it's a significant part of our history and one that young people need to know, and one that we encourage folks to come out and visit our communities and see where real cowboy stuff took place, and in many cases still takes place.
Okay. Well, somebody told me that they're going all the way up into Canada now with this. Is that?
There are 2 markers that I'm aware of, one in Regina and another one in another community whose name escapes me in Canada. We took a marker to Canada before the formal project ended in 2007, and had quite a delegation from Vernon go, and were met by a wonderful delegation in Regina, Saskatchewan. It hosted an event for us at the Museum of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and as I said, at their reception there were families there, ranching families there, that said they could trace their cattle herds to the cattle that came up the Great Western Trail. There are markers in North and South Dakota as well, and Colorado, Nebraska, and Kansas.
Okay.
And Montana.
Really? Montana?
Miles City, Montana.
That's why I use a 3-inch brush, because it'll fit in here. If you don't, I got to want to run in here because I'm in a hurry and I'm getting more paint on me than I am the marker. But if you take this, and you don't know if you can see from where we are, but the white in here is about half gone. Just take it in here and don't push down hard at all. Just do like that. And you'll see it will cover up. It won't get down in the red. So anyway, that's how you do it. And when we get through, we'll take a picture of it when we're done. And hopefully more civic groups and people like that will get involved to try to not let our history die, because it's a very important part of history. We went down to, what was it, Knoxville, Texas. You know what Knoxville is? Was Knoxville, wasn't it? Huh? Yeah, NOX. And there's a marker there in front of the old store and post office. It's a home now. It was a home back then too, but you know how they had homes with post offices. And the man that owns it was telling us his relatives were in that store back at that time. Mm-hmm. And they talk about when Creed Taylor, the great ex-Texas Ranger, would come around and they'd sit out there on the front porch and they would talk. But he said they got a school there in Knoxville. The school's still standing. And he was telling us that when the cattle herds crossed the James River and were coming up towards that school, there were so many of them that the school teacher could hear these cattle coming, that they were near. And so she would get all the kids out of the school and take them down over the hill, because she didn't want the cattle to hear anything that those kids might have said or anything that would stampede them. Mm-hmm. So she'd take them out of the school. But I thought that was quite interesting, that because I know a stampede is probably one of the worst things that can happen with a cattle herd. So anyway, you got anything else you want to say?
Well, what you were saying about the gentleman in the store kind of strikes a chord with us up in Wilbarger County. You know, C.F. Doane had Doane Store there on the river, and I think at the height of the cattle drive, he recorded 301,000 head of cattle that went past his store and his house in one season. And his great-grandson lives in Vernon and has a store there and is involved with the Doane's May picnic every year, where they gather under the shade by that old adobe house and they have a coronation of a king and queen and tell the old stories about the old cattle drives. And a group from Oklahoma rides across horseback. They tell one story about one year they had cattle waiting around Doane's store ready to take their turn to cross the river, and a thunderstorm came up and stampeded the cattle, and it took 150 cowboys 10 days to gather and sort 30,000 head of cattle and get them back in the right herd.
Unreal. Okay, well, I guess that's it. Unless you got anything else.
Thanks a million.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And we'll look forward to coming to Vernon.
We're looking forward to it.
Okay, thanks.